Hello, welcome to another CleaveTech tech tip. These are coming very fast now, all these tech tips, but they're all about the same sort of topic, and that's about getting this car ready for the Clubman Nationals. So you can see the body shell has now arrived. So in today's video, we're going to look at mounting this body shell onto the Intro 32 Genesis chassis and just show you how easy it is using the CleaveTech body jig. So you can tell this is not one of my paint jobs. It's nowhere near as beautiful as my pink bodies that I normally run. But this one was done by Paul Harwood, painted by Paul. He does a lovely job. This is an Audi R15 Colhoza body shell. Now this was the body shell that used to be run at ISRA Racing in Eurosport. It's a good shell. I've raced these shells before. They handle really nicely, so it should be a good addition to the Genesis chassis. So the first thing we're going to do is trim the front and the rear of the body ready for mounting it onto the jig. Now if I put a straight edge on the front of that body, you can see the mould line is reasonably nice and straight, but there is a very small curve in the mould line. So I need to make sure I'm cutting the front of the body really nice and straight. Also, I know that with these bodies, they're really tight over the guide at the very front of the body shell, so you need to leave a little bit of vertical edge at the front of the body in order to make sure it fits over the guide nicely and doesn't sort of have to be mounted a long way forward or lifted up in the air at the front. So I'm going to carefully mark a line across the front here, ready to trim. So I've marked a line across the front of the body using a ruler and a permanent marker. You notice I've left quite a large vertical edge at the front of the body shell, and I've gone pretty near the bottom of the moulding mark that's on the body shell. Again, that's because I want to make sure that this fits over the guide nicely. So the next stage was just to trim out the front of the body shell like that. So I've trimmed along this front edge and just a little bit at the side here and here. That's probably a better edge there. I'll just trim this side out a fraction more, just basically so you can come back a little bit down the side of the body. Now this body, you can see, curves in ever so slightly at the front. So I probably just want to cut it back just to take it into that curve a little bit more, about 5-10 millimeters back at most, away from that edge. So something like this. And that's fine on both edges. Then the next thing, I'm going to trim out the back of the body. Now, some people leave loads of the rear of the body in like this, but that just means that any air inside the body is just getting trapped at the back there, and you're not accelerating the air out of the body. You're actually blocking it at the top, creating extra drag. And I don't think you really need to do that. I know why people leave a bit more at the back of the body, and that's to give the wing some bracing and some strength. But to be honest, this part of the wing here gives it its strength, not necessarily loads more at the back here. The other reason why some people leave a lot more in the back of the body is because they want to cover the back tyres, because they want to mount the body really far forward. But again, I tend to mount my body shells more towards the rear to make the wing and the downforce act more over the rear tyres rather than the front. So I shall be trimming this all the way up to the top. So I use a nice small pair of curved scissors just to go round the corners at the top, and then I shall be sanding those corners later on to make sure that there's no nasty cuts or tears on the corner. Come round like that, and then I'm going to cut along here and follow the line of the wing and then go all the way back down the other side. So there we have the back of the body trimmed out, ready. So the front's trimmed nice and flat and straight, the back of the body's trimmed nice and flat and straight. So the next thing I'm going to do is just trim off some of this excess down the side here. Not all of it, but just some of the excess. I'll leave the mould line on there. I'm going to also check the height of the rear of the body, because sometimes the mould lines are not placed in exactly the right place. I know on these bodies they're pretty good, but I have seen some manufacturers' bodies where the mould line is nowhere near the right height to match the general rules of ISRA. But in the BSCRA, we're allowed 32.5 millimeter of body height at the rear. So I've just trimmed off the side of body. Notice I don't have to do it very accurately. I've left it longer on the sides than it needs to be, and that's the beauty of using the CleaveTech jig. As long as you get the front nice and straight and true, You've trimmed out the back. Again, the back didn't even have to be trimmed out that neatly at this stage, but I've done it anyway because I know that's how it's going to be. I've left the side slightly longer. So now we're ready to set up the jig. So this is the current model of the CleaveTech body jig. You can see there has been some changes since some of my earlier videos. I've added this piece in here, which helps keep the guide nice and straight and keeps your car central on the jig. I've also added various other cutouts on the surface of the jig, which allow you to mount retro body shells, because they have a different width rules to their various classes. So you can run retro shells, you can run all the ISRA shells, BSCRA, etc. So there's a whole range of widths of body shells and cars and rules you can accommodate with this body jig. Also, we've got some larger cutouts around the edges at the front. That's to accommodate body shells that have curves at the front of them and didn't fit down the slots on previous versions. So again, an improvement from before. Now, when you get your body jig, it's sort of in travel mode, which is everything sort of tidied up and put back. And you can see it actually stores very, very flat and nice. So in order to get the jig ready, I have to move these arms about. I have to slide these little pin tube guides. I have to slide them out of the jig, and then I can move these arms into place and set it up. So I've moved these arms out of the side here, out of the little storage holes there, and I'm going to loosen the back thumb screw, and then I can take out my wing parts, my wing jig there. This one magnetizes to the bottom like that, so I can remove those, and then I can set it up and get it ready to mount the body shell.
12 seconds later.
So having removed the rear wing part of the jig from underneath where it's stored nicely, I've now assembled it and set it up at the rear. Now you can see this piece here slides in. Now you've got two options. You've got this option here, which is on the top here, which is the magnetic holder, which is what I use for all sort of Eurosport or sports cars or things, basically body shells that have a long rear wing at the back of the car. So it could be a saloon shell, DTM, etc., etc. Or if you remove this part here and you don't put it on, then you can just literally rest your shell on this upright part here, and you can use that as the height of the rear of the shell and support your shell that way. Different people prefer different things, but I like this method because I know that this then holds right to the edges of the shell and holds it up nicely. You can also notice that there's markings on this upright. The first one gives you a guide at roughly 28mm, then we got 30, then we got 32, so you can see I'm at 32.5 in between there. Also, please note the way round that I've put this upright. When you're using this magnetic part, you want this upright and you want the flat edge of the magnetic part to sit on the flat edge here of the upright, not the other way round. So the markings should be on the inside. I've also used one of my nifty height templates to help me set up the rear. Now these height templates just sit in there, and then you can drop that wing height jig part down onto these little templates, and it helps you set it nice and square and straight, so you know you've got it the same height either side. It's much easier than trying to set each side with a caliper or something like that. Putting these in and dropping it down to match that template is dead easy. And these templates, depending on whether you've got the template storage or not, will store nicely underneath here. I put a couple of magnets into these extra little holes here, and all the height templates just store nicely in there. And I do a whole range of different sizes, and they all magnetize together, and they just store nicely in that gap under the jig there. And you can see that they will store, and it will still sit there. It will go in your box without taking up any more space. One last thing you need to do to the body shell, if you're going to use this magnetic part of the jig, is to put a little piece of piano wire inside the rear of the shell. Now, again, all shells have different sort of widths or at the back of the shell, so I don't really supply a little bit of piano wire. As long as it's magnetic, you can use anything inside there. So you can just drop it in the center of the wing, something like that. I use a little bit of tape just to hold it on so it doesn't fall off. And then that sits inside the wing, and it will magnetize itself up to these magnets here, and it'll hold the rear of the shell in exactly the right place for you. Now, nearly all the slot car rules I've come across generally tend to specify a maximum height for the rear wing on your body shell. So obviously that's the way I've done this. From the flat block here up to the rear wing, that is your maximum height that you can have. Now, some people like to mount their body shells, including the rear tyres. And now there are some rules that specify the maximum height does include ground clearance. So when you start to put your chassis on, if your rules include the ground clearance, you would need your tyres on your chassis as well, because obviously your tyres would lift the chassis up off the block a little bit with your ground clearance, and then when you've got the body on top and you pin your body, it'll be pinned in the right place, including the ground clearance. Now with BSCRA and ISRA rules, that doesn't include the ground clearance. So I don't tend to mount my chassis or mount the body shells on the chassis and leave the tyres on the car. But there are some people that like to leave the tyres on the car and mount their chassis or mount the body shell onto the chassis, because they just like to see where the tyres are in relation to the body shell. So if that was the case, then I do supply these extra little plates here. So if you've had a CleaveTech body jig in the past, that's what this little plate is for. But generally most people don't use them, so I've stopped supplying them as standard with the body jigs now. So, but if you did want one, you can request it as an extra to your body jig. But basically, these just clip on top like that. And then if you are mounting your body and you want to leave the tyres on in place, then you need to calculate your height between here and there, not the actual plate on the body jig itself. Obviously these come colour coded. This is just a white one off of a white body jig, just to show you I do other colours as well. Now this chassis here is quite magnetic, so it sticks to the magnets underneath the body jig, but some chassis aren't quite so magnetic or quite so strong. Therefore you can always use another set of magnets on top, over the top of the other magnets, to help hold it in place. Or sometimes people just put a little bit of tape on the chassis. When they get the chassis in the right place on the jig, they put a little bit of tape on it, front and rear, to stop the chassis from moving around. Again, most slot car rules specify that when the body shell is mounted on the chassis, you can't see any of the chassis, wheels, tyres, guide, etc. from above. And that applies in nearly all sorts of slot racing. However, BSCRA do allow you to be able to see the guide in 30-second scale coming out of the front of the car. I don't like that because it means that air gets in front, it gets all up inside the body shell at the front, etc. So I don't do that, but you could actually do that in 1/32nd scale BSCRA if you really wanted to. And some of the saloon type shells I've seen, people do have the guide mounted out the front of the shell. But I shan't be doing that with a sports car like this, because I want to try and make it as aerodynamic as I possibly can. So remember, I've got that little bit of piano wire in the top there of the body shell. That should then fit over my chassis, and you can see how the sides of the body shell go down into the slots on the body jig. So as I slide that back, that'll then, the magnets will hold the rear of the shell in place, and the rest of the shell will sit down those slots either side, and it will sit nicely, it should sit nice and level at the front like that, with a chassis underneath. Now I can tip it up a little bit, but not too much, because obviously the chassis will move underneath at the moment, but you can see how that sits nice and flat at the front, and the body shell goes down through those slots at the side. That's why you don't need to cut the body shell very accurately at the sides at this point. Now using this body jig is a great way to do lots of body shells at the same time. And I'm only going to do one. Well, actually I'm going to do two, because I've got another one ready for myself as well. But you can notice I've lined the body shell up with this little L-shaped recess here in the rear height wing jig part. So I'm being consistent. So it's pushed back against that edge there, and it's pushed back against that edge on that side as well. So it holds the body shell nice and straight and accurate. Now, depending on the body shell, they all have sort of different designs at the rear here. Now, I have to be careful with this one because it's got quite a pronounced step in the rear wing here, and that was needed to meet ISRA rules, which is what the body shell was designed for. I have to be careful where I actually put the rear tyres, because this Genesis chassis is quite short. Therefore, if I move the chassis all the way to the front of the body shell, I could end up with a tyre here, and I'm going to cut a wheel arch there, and it's right by this little cutout here. So I need to make sure that the rear of the chassis, or where the tyres sit, is somewhere about there, so that I can afford to cut round the wheel arch and not cut right into this little corner here. I also need to make sure that the rear wing covers the tyre when viewed from above. So I need to make sure that you can't actually see the tyres from above, because again, that's in the rules. You shouldn't be able to see the rear tyres or the rear of the chassis or gear or anything when viewed from above. So I've got to manipulate that chassis underneath to get it to the right point. Now this is why I always like mounting these body shells when they're clear, and then I paint them afterwards. But I didn't have a choice with this one because Paul Harwood's very, very nicely donated this body to go on this car for the Clubman Nationals. So I've got my chassis now mounted on the jig in the right place, and I've just run a couple of little bits of tape just to hold it in place, because I'm going to be lifting it up and moving it around a bit, and I don't want the chassis to move. You can also see that when you look from directly above where the gear is, so I know that when I put the tyre on, which is only fractionally bigger than the gear anyway, then I know that the back of the body is definitely going to be covering the rear tyres as well. The next thing I'm going to do is take these pins, these large headed pins. I'm going to be sliding them into here and lining up each one of these pin arms with each one of the 4 pin tubes. So I've aligned each one of these pin tube arm holder things in line with each one of the 4 pin tubes, and you can see that the pins slide in and out nicely. There is a small gap between these pin guides and the pin tubes to allow the body shell to go in between. So the body shell should just slide on back through those gaps there. Make sure the body shell sits nice and flat all the way round. Make sure it's sitting nicely at the front. And then the next stage is dead easy. Done. So I pushed all 4 pins in. It's easier to hold it around the edges and push them in together, and then they hold in place nicely and nothing moves. So all 4 pins are in place, and now I'm going to mark the side of the body. So I'm going to take my marker pen, and then I can use the jig and I can draw a line all along the side of the body shell, both sides, and that gives me my nice neat cut line for the sides of the body shell.
A few moments later.
So hopefully that shows up well enough on camera. You can see where I've drawn the line. It's just a fraction above the bottom of the jig, and that way I know it's going to be clear on the sides of the track and clear on the sides of the chassis. You can see the front of the body shell is all the way down onto the block. I can always trim the body shell later, because that's why I leave a fair bit at the front anyway, because I can hear people saying, well, you could put a little bit of tape maybe across the front, or a little bit of Lexan to lift the front of the shell up so you know it's going to be clear. But I always like to trim it afterwards, because I'm also going to trim a little bit out of these wheel arches, and sometimes the body shell moves as you trim up the wheel arches, and also sometimes it moves a fraction when you reinforce the pin tubes and you're putting tape on it and pushing your pin back through the tape, etc. So I always trim the front of the body shell. Is one of the last things that I do. So at this point, if you were pinning multiple body shells, if you had maybe 3 or 4 to do, maybe even 5 body shells to do, then you could just literally pull the 4 pins back out again, like so, remove the body shell, put the next body shell on and pin it again. And you could just go through and you've got all of your body shells all pinned exactly the same on your car, all in one go really quickly. Now I do actually have one more shell to mount, because I need to mount one on a chassis for me. And the shell I've got here is a Better Zytec. I think it says it's 2014 Zytec something or other. No idea what they are, but I think they'll be a reasonable shell. So I've got one here mounted on my jig, but you can see I'm able to get the chassis in a slightly different position. I'm able to get the guide slightly further under the front of the body shell, so I'll need to move my jig around a little bit for this different shape of body shell.
A few moments later.
So you can see this is why I quite like having a clear body shell when I'm actually mounting it onto the chassis for the first time using the jig, because you can see exactly where the guide is, you can see where the back wheels are going to be, you can see where the motor sits under the shell, you can see everything. So I find it much easier to mount it like this, then spray it afterwards. Now, most body shells these days come with a protective coating on anyway, so when you're spraying the inside, you're not going to get loads of overspray on the outside of the shell, because you can remove this greeny coloured clear coating afterwards. Anyway, there we have it. This is the shell here. It's got its pin tube or pinholes already in it. So I'll need to trim it up, I'll need to reinforce it, and then I can mount it on the chassis. I'm not going to go through all the reinforcing and final trimming, etc., because I've shown that in a previous video, and I'll stick a link up here for the previous video. But I hope you can see that using the body jig can make things really nice and quick, especially if you're doing multiple shells at a time. And of course, it means that your shell is mounted nice and accurately onto your chassis, nice and square, and you're not trying to hold everything in your hands in all different places. So thank you very much again for watching my video. Thanks for sticking with this channel, and there's plenty more to come very soon. Well, I bet you all thought that was the end of the video. Well, not quite, because I just thought I'd show you the body all mounted on and reinforced, pinned onto the chassis, all ready to go. Just needs a set of tyres and some front wheel stickers on there, and it'll be ready to go. That is really it. Bye.